What man really fears is not so much extinction, but extinction with insignificance. Ernest Becker.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. There's little evidence so far that Crooks had a history of resentments or grievances against others, as 97% of profiled assassins did. That is what has been posted in the Washington Post in their latest quote-unquote assessment of Thomas Crooks. Now, once again, I'm astonished at just how awful experts and media pundits are at simply trying to understand a fellow human being. This analysis from the Washington Post article that is explicitly about profiling and analyzing shooters and the quote-unquote investigation fails miserably at every turn. I'll put a link to the whole article in the description. Not once in the entire 2,000-word article are the words bullied or humiliated even mentioned, or even almost mentioned. There's a lot of obvious evidence that Crooks did have a history of resentments or grievances. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Just a reminder that I have written books on mass shooters. You can find links to those in the description. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So, as I say, there's a lot of obvious evidence that Crooks did have a history of resentments or grievances. Firstly, the fact that he did what he did, a 20-year-old, America's youngest would-be assassin ever, tried to kill President Trump. That shows someone with a grievance. Any person who wants to kill another person, for God's sake, has a grievance. Secondly, we know he was an isolated person. Isolated people aren't happy people. Lonely people, especially lonely young people, aren't living their best lives. Thirdly, and this holds hands with the second point, Crooks was lonely enough and unhappy enough to want to lose his life, to want to end his life. And that was the point of the whole thing. That was the primary motive. The S word that rhymes with homicide, that was Crooks's primary motive here, is also entirely missing from the Post's analysis. Fourthly, bullying may seem a quaint and almost meaningless term to older folk, to the grizzled, middle-aged journalists and salt-and-pepper-head professors pontificating pointlessly on this case. It may be a concept, almost like a hypothetical, that you have long since forgotten about, when you were at school, now that you are in a 9-to-5 suburban setting. But it's the daily meat and potato psychology of a kid at school wearing braces. Did you notice that about this kid, that he was wearing braces? Did you wear braces at school? Or then perhaps you don't know what it was like. And so I'm not sure if you've noticed, Crooks not only wore braces, but he also wore glasses. And so both of those would automatically relegate him to weak male status. I'm not sure if you realize that that is the society we live in. If you wear braces, it means you're a weak male. If you wear glasses, it means you're a weak male. If you wear glasses and braces, according to the society and the standards that we live in, that confers a particular status on you. Is that really who you are? Is that who society says you are? And of course, at that age, it's easy to believe or to take on what society says as who you are. The Post goes on to note, this is not a case of someone who's failed in everything and feels like a failure or feels like he's a loser, a nobody, and the only thing he can do with his life is to go out in a blaze of glory. So this is what one of the professors is saying in this Post article, that this is not the case of someone like that. Oh, it's not. Just because you don't think Crooks qualified as a loser doesn't mean he didn't. It doesn't mean his classmates didn't. The only smidgen of analysis that takes the article anywhere of importance, anywhere that has any merit, is a reference to Crooks's interest in Crumbly, the Oxford shooter. At one point in his almost 20-minute recording the day before the shooting, Crumbly said the following.
There's so many people who think they're going to live a life, going to go to college, have a great career, get a family, grow old, die happily. But they don't know that in less than a day, I'm going to die.
And this is what resonated with Crooks as well, the contrast between his life and your life. It's inconsequential whether you think Crooks was or wasn't a loser. What matters in terms of accurate profiling is what he thought. And if he wanted to die, and he clearly did, he clearly saw the Secret Service snipers, he was very exposed as a target. He knew the moment he pulled the trigger, they would too, and that is exactly what happened. That's what Crumbly thought would happen as well. Do you notice Crumbly and Crooks both wear glasses? That also, in the world of superficial, artificial men, makes you a lesser man. And yet the Post somehow manages to see Crooks as an unknowable enigma. This is another quote from the article. Where he fits into the ever-expanding catalogue of notorious American gunmen could take years to understand, according to experts and historians. I don't know, it's like a total head slap moment. Where he fits could take years to understand, according to the experts and historians the Post has spoken to. The article goes on to note, he's hard to categorize in part because his still evolving portrait evokes the profile of a mass shooter, at least one of whom he researched. But Crooks wasn't a mass shooter, instead becoming what some historians believe to be the youngest person to make an attempt on the life of a current or past president. Now, it's interesting that whoever wrote this article thinks that he's not a mass shooter, and yet that was who he seemed to identify with. That was someone who he was searching up on. Actually, if it wasn't for the fast reactions of the much maligned Secret Service, this would have been a mass shooting. Crooks fired off 8 rounds before he was killed, and 4 people were injured, 1 fatally. It could very, very easily have been so much worse. There was certainly a similar scenario in terms of an envelope of stadia packed with people that echoed the worst shooting in American history, Vegas. I've been to Vegas, I've written about that shooting, and it bears many, many similarities, many, many intertextualities. Going back to the article, it's important for investigators to understand what leads to any killing, but it's essential in this case at this moment when some fear the country's political fissures could lead to more bloodshed, said Jeffrey A. Engel, founding director of the Center for Presidential History at Southern Methodist University. Yes, it is important to understand, but investigators are failing spectacularly in that mission.
You are about to fail that mission.
The article continues, if this is an individual who was like a school shooter, disturbed and angry and found this as a way to lash out, that's a terrible, terrible social problem we need to deal with. But it's not a question of our democracy, Engel said. It's important that we know whether or not we need to worry about political violence more than any other violence. Well, yes, it is a terrible, terrible social problem, and it's a completely misunderstood one, which is why it persists, which means the terrible, terrible problem is going to get worse and worse until it is understood and addressed. The Post goes on to say, 3 decades ago, the US Secret Service set out to analyze 83 actual or would-be assassins who had acted between 1949 and 1996, eventually publishing a report intended to help law enforcement better understand and thwart these attacks.
Ooh, yeah. I'm going to have to go ahead and sort of disagree with you there.
Analyzing assassins isn't going to work here. Crooks fired several shots, and I don't think his target was just Trump, or even necessarily specifically Trump himself. So let's go on to the rest of the study. Quote, by study's end, the researchers have come to a stark conclusion. There are no accurate or useful descriptive, demographic, or psychological profiles of American assassins, attackers, and near-lethal approaches. Oopsie, not a good start for trying to figure this out, is it?
That was the plan.
Not a great plan.
So, where to from here? Mind if I offer a suggestion? In the same way that you don't need to be a professor of psychiatry or some kind of expert on assassins to see how other kids saw this kid, or to see how he saw himself. You don't need a microscope to see the obvious either. The bullying was part of this feeling of hopelessness and insignificance. It was part of the depression, but it wasn't the only part. What makes people feel insignificant? Well, it's the daily drudgery that doesn't seem to amount to anything.
Insignificance.
What is insignificance? It's the quality of being too small or unimportant to be worth consideration. And the example they give in the dictionary is he is aware of his own insignificance within the bigger picture. And so the number one clue we all missed is poverty. Have you looked at the house where Crooks lived when he died? Being poor, not having much money, is a sure way to feel trapped in one's circumstances, in whatever godforsaken corner of America one happens to find oneself in. America is supposed to be a land of opportunity, and yet one may wake up to find yourself somehow stuck somewhere in this wonderful land of opportunity, stuck in a cage, trapped. How does this happen? I've been through the American fabric. I've been to Brian Laundrie's house, to Casey Anthony's house, to Rex Huerman's house. I've stood in front of all these houses. And this is the place where dreams are born, but also where they fizzle and die. Crooks lived with his folks in a simple, small house in an ordinary neighborhood, and hence he felt simple and small. He felt ordinary. When he went to school, he was told just how ordinary and subpar he was. Did he like feeling simple and small? Do you? When he left school at the end of the day, he felt simple and small, only to return to this house where he continued to feel simple and small. Eventually, he started believing in it, or at least letting go of his dream, believing he was doomed and unable to escape his lot in life. By the way, this house looks like a doppelganger for Rex Huerman's house in Massapequa, doesn't it? Only sadder, smaller, squatter, and more pathetic. And then he went to a job in a nursing home where he gave old folks their meals, and he thought, is this what life is? Is it? Is this what life is? Like many of us, Crooks wanted to be a somebody, but his desperation was driven by being told he was a nobody. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.